All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here with us, and welcome to our now our roadmap review session for the end of the year. I am Flannery Winchester. I'm CCL's Vice President of Communications. So we are coming to the end of 2024, which is also the end of the 118th Congress. We've achieved a lot. We've advanced a lot of policy in this past year. But before we get into the specifics, I want to just set the stage a little bit. So, a few things are true about our work. One, it takes a long time. And two, it happens little by little. As much as we wish that it could be as straightforward as one big bill that just zooms through Congress and fixes everything, this is our reality. Progress takes a while, and it usually happens a little bit at a time. And that's true about climate work in general, actually. So, as a planet, we've already spent many years aware of the problem of climate change. We've been getting countries together to discuss this problem now for decades. We've been slowly starting to chip away at this problem. But let's remember that decades ago, experts said we were on track for 4 to 5 degrees Celsius of global warming. Back in 2015, we were on track for 3.5 to 4 degrees Celsius of global warming. Now we're on track for 2.5, 3 degrees. Obviously, still a long way to go to get to the stable, healthy climate that we want, but humanity has already erased multiple degrees from our future warming path with the progress that we've made so far. And there hasn't been one silver bullet policy or investment that made that possible. It's been countless smaller scale policy choices and progress from different administrations, from other countries, from new technologies, and on and on. But all of that together has bent that curve and put us on a better path. And the same is true for our work here at CCL. We're aiming at a big goal, right? We want to stop the pollution that's overheating the planet. And all our efforts generate wins along the way that are leading to that lower pollution and to a more stable climate. And when we zoom out a little bit, we can see how those efforts over a long period of time build on each other and create that outcome that we're working for. So, with those ideas in mind, last year we created the 2024 Policy Roadmap. It's a way to visualize and remember the importance of the steps that we're taking on that path to lower pollution, and it also reminds us of the time horizon of our work. Plus, let's be honest, it just helps us remember it all. In the incredibly fast pace of life and news and entertainment and everything these days, it's too easy to forget where we've been and what we've done. So today, we're going to pause here at the end of the year to look back and celebrate the policy progress that we made in 2024, and I'm going to look at all of those key moments where we made our voices heard to lawmakers. And as we're looking at these national wins, I invite you to also think about your own personal roadmap of advocacy this year. So what are some stops along the way that you want to remember from 2024? And they don't have to be policy specific necessarily. Maybe your roadmap has a special chapter event or a really standout moment from a lobby meeting or a great tabling experience. So think about those as we go through the roadmap today. Share those in the chat, and we will share and celebrate those together at the end of the session. All right, so now I am going to pull up our roadmap and share my screen here. So, as we look back over our national level progress, we're going to click through this interactive version of the roadmap, which was made by the amazing Elena Kappa on CCL's IT team. So we'll drop the link in the chat if you want to check it out on your own, click around. But when you pull it up, you can see all of our policy areas and all these little pins dropped to show our milestones in each area. And you actually can now click into them and drill down on each one. So I'll show you the electrification one as an example. So at the beginning of the year, down here at the map, you see we had sketched out educate about electrification as one of our plans. We were setting the intention to spread the word in our communities about the Inflation Reduction Act, tax credits, and rebates. And so if we click on the electrification filter up here, it focuses our attention here on where this policy area really came to life, which was in August when we had more than 3,400 conversations about home electrification. And here you see in this pop-up, there's a little more information and a link where you can hop over to the campaign page and learn more. And similarly, the election season filter shows that we, well, let's see, you can see here on these purple road signs, we had planned to elevate climate in the primary elections and get out the environmental vote later in the year. And our milestones here show that we started weekly phone banks to environmental voters in the spring during primary season. And again, you can drill down into some of those specifics. And then by election day, CCL volunteers had made over 1,040,000 dials to to potential environmental voters to get out the vote. And our healthy forests policy area, these mostly showed up as secondary asks this year, but we saw some climate-friendly farm and forest policy advance through committees and gain more support after our lobbying. So that's just a little example of how you can kind of slice and dice this interactive version of the roadmap. But being able to look at it that way, it kind of shows how our policy areas really ebb and flow throughout the year. And it also shows that some years, certain policy areas really come to the forefront. So this year, one of those was clean energy permitting reform. So let's take a closer look at just the permitting reform milestones this year. And also, as we go through this section, feel free to put any questions in the Q&A, and we will take a few when we get through this portion of the map. So in the area of permitting reform, we kicked off the year with 11,476 messages to Congress, asking them to work on a bipartisan package of permitting reform legislation. So this was building on our permitting reform advocacy that actually started back in 2023 and was largely focused around a bill called the Big Wires Act, which focused on electricity transmission between regions of the country. So we lobbied on that at our, our fall conference last year. And then we started out strong this January, reminding Congress that permitting overall is an important priority. And then we drove that point home in our lobby meetings at the conservative conference here in the spring, which focused on permitting reform opportunities, including specific bills like the Advance Act for nuclear energy, which had actually passed the House earlier in the year, and then the HEATS Act for geothermal energy. And then we kept up that lobbying energy in the summer, where we, it was a primary ask at our summer lobby meetings. So we had 442 lobby meetings on Capitol Hill, again, reinforcing that, that focus on permitting reform. And then here you see there are months where it looks like things are a little quiet, right? All through here. But that is where our asks have been marinating. Offices are discussing together. And crucially, our DC staff are continuing to meet with lawmakers and with Hill staff all the time to reinforce our volunteers' messages and keep advancing the conversation. So then here in the last few months of 2024, we see everything really start to shake loose with permitting reform. So the Advance Act was included in a larger bill and passed by the Senate with 88 votes. And so there was robust bipartisan support that we helped build during those conservative conference lobby meetings earlier in the year. And then that bill was signed into law in July. And then that same month, a bipartisan pair of senators introduced the Energy Permitting Reform Act, which was, this was the type of bipartisan permitting package that we had been hoping to see and that we had asked for at all these earlier moments in the year. And it includes a ton of measures on transmission, which go all the way back to that Big Wires advocacy we did back in 2023. So that introduction itself was an exciting milestone. And it's a signal that our advocacy had been helping advance that conversation on Capitol Hill. So the sponsoring senators, it's Joe Manchin from West Virginia and John Barrasso from Wyoming. They were pretty motivated to move that bill along, so they teed it up for a committee vote the following week, actually. And we, our government affairs team, our research department, had a pretty good back of the napkin sense of the bill's likely impacts based on some existing modeling. So we felt confident that the bill was a good one for the climate. So when it came out, we put out a public statement in support of the bill, and then our volunteers with senators on the committee sprang right into action, and they started making calls. So in just a few days, we generated more than 500 calls to folks on that committee. And two of those committee members signed on the bill as co-sponsors after that mobilization began. And then the bill on July 31st, it actually passed with a vote of 15-4, which had one more Republican vote than expected. So we see CCL's bipartisan fingerprints all over this. And so then after this committee passage, it was time to start talking to the rest of Congress about this bill, especially because the modeling came out on this specific bill and the specific measures in it, and confirmed that it would significantly reduce climate pollution. So we were all in. So we put out a call to action. Volunteers sent 9,204 messages to Congress during September, specifically building support for the Energy Permitting Reform Act. So you can see that our more general permitting reform advocacy from earlier in the year, and even from the year before, built and ultimately led to this big piece of legislation that embodies so many of the elements that we've been asking for. Let's see. And then we kept up the general drumbeat on climate action with our post-election messages here. And Congress also continues to move forward smaller permitting reform or permitting related bills that we've lobbied on, like the HEATS Act here, which the House just passed a few weeks ago. So we've really had a flurry of results after nearly 2 full years of consistent advocacy for clean energy permitting reform. And of course, the road doesn't stop here. So you see this, the lean in during the lame duck area of the map. That's where we are now. So we have hundreds of virtual lobby meetings coming up next week, where the Energy Permitting Reform Act will be the primary ask. And we just launched a calling campaign for all volunteers to place calls to Congress about this bill as well. So hopefully we'll succeed in showing enough broad, enthusiastic support that Congress will pass this bill before the end of the year and lock in its climate and clean energy benefits. And if that happens, remember just how many months of steady strategic advocacy helped us get to that moment. And of course, if it doesn't happen, trust that we will continue pushing the conversation forward until we achieve our goals. So I will pause now for any questions that folks have about the permitting milestones or this portion of the map. And as a reminder, keep putting in any of those personal milestones that you want to celebrate in the chat as well. So Sabrina, hi, are you seeing any questions from folks on permitting?
Yes, on the roadmap itself. So 2 quick questions that directly relate to that. One is from Carl, who asked about the messaging of net zero by 2050. Are you going to plan to use this in the next Congress?
That's a great question. So likely not, because one other thing that we did this year, which is not a policy thing, but was a big feature of CCL's work this year, is that we started to partner with Potential Energy Coalition, which is a group of marketers who have studied what are the most effective messages to talk about climate change, to talk about climate action. And so it was through their work and also advice from Science Moms, I believe they also partner with, that we built our campaign in April of this year about climate conversations and how to really talk about this stuff in ways that resonates with people. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that Potential Energy found is that this idea of net zero by 2050 or talking about percentages by a certain year, it doesn't really land with folks. And so even though those of us who are sort of wonky and in the climate space, we like those targets, we like that specificity, it's not immediately meaningful to just a regular person.
Yeah.
And so no, that's not, since we made this roadmap at the end of last year, that has evolved a little bit. So no, we probably wouldn't frame the end of the road with that particular milestone, because of course, time is advancing, the targets are changing, and we always also want to be as ambitious as possible. So no, we don't use that phrase as often anymore because of what we've learned from their messaging work.
Thank you for that framing. It's so important for us to continue to learn and see how we can better message things. The other questions that's directly related to your roadmap comes from Debbie Chang, where she was concerned about any places where we fell short of our goals and any external reasons why you think that occurred and where we could improve.
That's a good question. So that is probably something more to dive into in the later session with our legislative team, because they have a better sense of if the numbers we're seeing, the amount of contact with Congress that we're achieving, if that is moving the needle as much as they would hope to see. So I would say hang on to that for our government affairs staff, and ask them what else, how else we can show up to give Congress the messages at the volume that they need to hear it from us.
Okay, thanks so much. We'll continue to answer questions that are not directly related to your talk, but keep putting them in as Flannery continues.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Sabrina. So before we move on from the permitting reform section, I will give a plug for our permitting reform panel it's 3:15 Eastern, 12:15 Pacific, where Dana from our research team and those two outside experts that Rachel mentioned from Grid Strategies and from Third Way, they will go really in depth on this policy area and the Energy Permitting Reform Act itself. Okay, so the other big policy area that we did a lot on this year was, as always, carbon pricing. So if any of you attended Danny Richter's talk a few weeks ago, he talked about how the carbon pricing conversation has evolved over the years and is really entering a new phase with a much more international focus. So in the spirit of skating to where the puck is going, we did a lot of work last year and this year on something called the Prove It Act, while continuing to build the long-term case for a domestic carbon price as well. So the Prove It Act would direct the Department of Energy to measure the carbon pollution related to certain goods produced both here in the US and in certain other countries. And this is so that we can have accurate information to negotiate with trading partners like the EU, who have carbon border tariffs in place or coming into effect soon. So we lobbied hard on the Prove It Act during much of last year. And right off the bat in January of this year, here, let me do our carbon pricing filter. So right off the bat in January of this year, we saw that lobbying effort begin to bear fruit with the Senate committee passage of this bill. So before the committee vote, volunteers placed calls to their senators on the committee to support its passage. And this bill also ended up passing with more bipartisan support than expected. Are you noticing a pattern here? And then a little bit later in the spring, we had another broad mobilization of messages to Congress about Prove It, with more than 8,700 messages. And then later, in advance of our summer lobbying, we generated 1,870 calls about the bill before our summer lobby meetings. And then it was a primary ask in our 442 meetings this summer. So then, not long after our big show of support on Capitol Hill, the House version of the Prove It Act was finally introduced. And then we quickly saw more than a dozen new offices actually sign on as co-sponsors after that initial introduction. And I want to circle back to this milestone here, these 9,574 messages to Congress. These are also marked as a carbon pricing milestone. This was something we did in the spring when some new research had just come out showing that a carbon price would still be incredibly effective and, in fact, is necessary to meeting our climate goals, even with a big policy like the Inflation Reduction Act in place. So we wanted to be sure that Congress knew that and had that research in hand, because we were always still working toward a long-term goal of a domestic carbon price. And I'll point out here again, you can see the ebb and flow of each policy area. So volunteer action on the Prove It Act necessarily slowed down during campaign season, this stretch here, and as permitting reform started to take center stage. But again, our government affairs staff are always keeping irons in the fire with their relationships on Capitol Hill. They're continuing to raise this priority in their own meetings, and they keep reinforcing what the volunteers have said throughout the year to Congress. So all of this work puts us in a strong position looking ahead to 2025, when, as we've been talking about, there's likely to be lots of discussion about tariffs, which could include a carbon border tariff to drive pollution down worldwide. All right, so I will pause here again now for any questions that folks have about our carbon pricing milestones this year, or any of that portion of the roadmap. Sabrina, anything coming up there?
Well, there's a lot of questions in there, and I'm not sure I read them all, but I think certainly there's a lot specifically about the energy permitting reform. And I hope that people will ask those when Ben talks, right? Is that where we're sending them?
Yes, well, and also Dana and those two outside experts have a specific permitting reform panel, so that's really the place to go to dig in on that.
Okay, I hope to see more deeper discussions on that later on. So, in addition to permitting reform, I think one of the things that you could answer directly from your talk is when the new roadmap will appear for 2025.
Yeah, great question. So we will roll out the new roadmap hopefully before the end of January. It is in design right now. We've been having lots of talks internally about what we want to set as those, what's going to be on the road signs. What do we expect that we can plan to do next year based on the landscape, based on all the information that our government affairs staff already has from their meetings on the Hill. So it is in progress, and you'll see it sometime in January. And also it will look a little different because our marketing team has been hard at work on a new brand style. And so it'll be, yeah, snazzy and new in addition to being for 2025.
Did you want to address the status of the Prove It Act?
No, that's a question better suited to our government affairs staff. So it's out there, and I think it has some possibilities in the as we come up here into this end of year landscape, but they will know the best, the latest and greatest on that one.
Okay, thanks.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Sabrina. And before we move totally off of that carbon pricing one, I'll just plug another session for folks who want to go deeper on carbon pricing. CCL Policy Fellow Danny Richter has a breakout session later that you can attend, where he will get he will get into more detail about all of that. All right. Well, now that we have reviewed and celebrated some of the highlights from this year's policy work, I hope that you have a better sense of how all the lobby meeting asks, all the messages to Congress, all the work that you've put in this year has helped move us closer to our goals of passing strong bipartisan climate policy. I hope that it's satisfying to see it all laid out there and connected together, and that you really feel how each step builds on the next. Because this is the persistence that CCL's founder, Marshall Saunders, always talked about. He said, way back at the beginning of CCL, he said, what's needed is hundreds of people to organize themselves, get educated, and lobby their members of Congress in a relentless, unstoppable way. Relentless, unstoppable. Marshall knew that this work wouldn't be easy or quick. He knew that it wouldn't be a one and done kind of project. Relentless, unstoppable. That's what we are, and that's what I hope you see and feel from the roadmap of your work this year. So now we'll take a few final minutes here to celebrate your milestones. Charlotte, my colleague here, has been watching for your personal milestones as you've shared them in the chat. So Charlotte, what are you seeing?
Yeah, we've got some great ones here, Flannery. So Laura and two friends joined their local chapter in Ohio and lobbied in DC, tabled on campus, and much more. So really hit the ground running. Ronald says in July 2024, their Hawaii House MOCs co-sponsored the Prove It Act. Yay. Francis said sent a few hundred postcards for the Environmental Voter Project and helped to organize 2 postcard parties. And Wanda and Dana also did phone banking. and canvassing with EVP. So we love that. Tom's biggest personal highlight was helping West Virginia and Kentucky lobby their senators for the Advance Act. Chelsea says discussions of inclusion made big progress this year. There's much further still to go, and that'll be a priority this year. So that's great. Sharon says 26 teams of middle and high school students across the country are lobbying their school boards to commit to electrify everything through the Great School Electrification Challenge. That'll be reopening in January, so make sure you have folks in your chapter sign up for that. Susan loved getting to attend and lobby at this year's national meeting in June with her daughter. That's lovely. Patsy used the home electrification team's tabling tools at an energy fair, and almost 20 people signed up for home energy coaching. Well done. Astra says he has been busy sending emails to Congress and writing letters to the editor. That's great. Mary says her state, Montana, had a great year generating lots of media. I've definitely seen lots of your work, so well done, Montana. And Aaron gave a talk about an approach to avoiding climate burnout, which is really important. We all need that talk in our lives, but I think this conference is definitely helping us to be optimistic.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Charlotte, and thank you everybody for sharing your own personal milestones. It is worth it, especially here at the end of the year, to take some time to look back on everything that you've done, all the effort that you've put in, everything that you've achieved, because as we know, it's all moving the needle. All right, so that's all the time that we have for this session. Incredible work, everyone. So thank you again for your contributions to those national achievements, as well as everything that you've been doing at the chapter level and in your own work. And as I said, we'll roll out our 2025 policy roadmap next month, so you'll have a better sense of what might come down the pike next year and how CCL plans to make an impact. And I personally can't wait to see what else we're going to do together.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration.
Like what you hear? Recommend us to your friends and make sure to give us a 5-star rating. It helps us show up on other listeners' feeds. Feel free to pass on any suggestions for future episodes in the comments as well.
And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.